There's an old saying, he who controls the narrative controls reality. The most powerful weapon of the 21st century is not a missile. It's a message. The battle for the future is not fought only on the battlefield, it's fought in the mind. When narratives move faster than facts, perception becomes reality. This is not merely politics, it's power. From Washington to Tehran, from New York to Los Angeles, from Brussels to Jerusalem, from Moscow to Beijing, influence has become the defining force of our time. Wars are waged with words. Reputations rise and fall with hashtags. Public opinion shifts not through deliberation, but through repetition. In an era of engineered consensus, the defining question is no longer what is true, but who decides what is to be believed. Welcome to Common Ground. I'm Yuval David. Throughout my work as a journalist, international news commentator, filmmaker, actor, political advisor, strategic consultant, I focus on communication and impact. Across the United States, Israel, the Middle East, the Gulf nations, India, Europe, Africa, and beyond, my work focuses on confronting extremism, defending democratic values, and illuminating the forces shaping our global conversation. This podcast, Common Ground, is dedicated to clarity in an age of confusion where facts are examined, narratives are challenged, and ideas are tested against evidence and principle. This specific episode explores a defining question of our time. Are opinions being formed or engineered? This is the politics of perception. This is the architecture of persuasion. This is engineered influence. The illusion of organic consensus. Look around. The same slogans, the same hashtags, the same talking points repeated across continents within hours, sometimes even faster. That's not coincidence. In political science, that's what we call agenda setting, which refers to the power to determine what the public thinks about. And once the topic is chosen, interpretation follows. This is known as narrative alignment. We've seen this across the world, from synchronized protests in major Western cities to coordinated messaging across universities and social media platforms. Pre-printed signs, prepared slogans, instant mobilization. In the digital age, movements no longer take months to organize, they take minutes. When every voice sounds the same, it's worth asking, who wrote the script? Consensus can be cultivated and sometimes manufactured. If narratives appear overnight across continents, coordination, not coincidence, deserves consideration. Agenda setting doesn't guide people towards what to think, it guides them toward what to think about. And in the digital age, repetition is persuasion. So let's focus on when activism becomes performance. Modern activism often blurs the line between advocacy and performance. Placards replace policy. Hashtags replace history. Slogans replace substance. I call this phenomenon performative activism. It has appeared across global movements, from corporate virtue signaling to social media campaigns that prioritize visibility over meaningful change. For example, during the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran, millions protested against oppression. And yet, some Western activists amplified narratives disconnected from the lived experience of Iranian citizens. And even during this war with Iran, across the US, there are demonstrations and protests that are opposed to US action against the Islamic Republic and that are supporting the Islamist regime in Iran. These protests are largely organized by socialist, communist, Marxist, progressive, Palestinianist, and Islamist supporting groups. The alliance is mind-twisting. And yet, It's happening right before our eyes. And similarly, authoritarian regimes in Venezuela and Cuba have been romanticized by activists abroad despite documented repression and economic collapse. So when performative activists march in the streets of democratic nations and chant in support of non-democratic oppressive regimes, which, by the way, would not only take away their rights but imprison or kill them, any rational thinking person with awareness would question the genuine motivation of these activists. These examples reveal a troubling pattern. People are not always aligning with values. They're aligning with narratives. And this brings us to something we are seeing unfold right now globally: the rise of performative pro-Palestinian activism. Across cities in the United States, Europe, and beyond, people have taken to the streets, to campuses, to social media, claiming to stand for Palestinian rights. But here's the question that must be asked. What are they actually doing for Palestinians? Where is the advocacy for infrastructure in Gaza? Where is the pressure on Hamas to govern with accountability, transparency, and a focus on human rights? Where is the outrage over documented repression of Gazans by their own leadership? Because Hamas is not just a political entity. It is a designated terrorist organization by multiple Western governments, and its governance has been widely reported to include suppression of dissent, restrictions of freedom, and the prioritization of militarization over civilian well-being. And yet, much of what is seen from these protests across the West is not constructive advocacy. What it is condemnation. Condemnation of Israel, targeting of Jews, targeting of Zionists, targeting of Israelis of all faiths, by the way, across the world. This is where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore, because many of these same activists claim to stand for human rights, social justice, equality, freedom, and yet in practice, some engage far too often in bigotry, engage in hate speech, engage in intimidation, and at times engage in violence. That is not human rights advocacy. That is ideological performance. Symbols have replaced substance. Keffiyehs, the scarves that you see the Palestinianist activists wear and the Islamists and the jihadists wear, these keffiyehs, these scarves, are worn as identity statements, not as cultural understanding. Signs held high, but rarely backed by policy knowledge. Slogans repeated without historical or geopolitical context, and in some cases, support, whether intentional or not, for movements and regimes that fundamentally oppose women's rights, LGBT rights, religious freedom, democratic governance. There's a profound irony here, because many of the values these activists claim to defend are the very values rejected by the extremist ideologies that they're amplifying. So again, the question must be asked: is this activism, or is it alignment with a narrative without understanding its consequences? These examples reveal a deeper pattern. People are not always aligning with values. They're aligning with narratives. True activism is informed. Performative activism is rehearsed and awfully narcissistic. Outrage without understanding is not advocacy, it's theater. Virtue signaling seeks applause. Principled advocacy seeks change. A placard is not a policy, and slogans can inspire, but they can also obscure.